Back in his college coaching days, former Seattle Seahawks head coach Pete Carroll called all of his players out to the football field at midnight to compete against each other in games of tug of war. He had the players line up on either side of a very large rope he borrowed from a local fire station earlier that day and had them compete offense versus defense, receivers versus cornerbacks, and so on, pitting the different groups against each other. The purpose of this was to show the guys that they could never win together pulling against each other. And he famously hung signs on the training center during his tenure with the Seahawks that said, "I'm in." He had them in his office, he had them everywhere. And what those signs represented was that it wasn't possible to win together unless you were in for pulling on the same side as the rest of the team. Nowadays, there's a very clear example of two groups who have lost sight of that and don't seem to understand that belief. And that would be the Democrats and Republicans, the two major parties of US politics. We have a two-party political system, and the two parties now are stuck in a constant fight between each other. The battle for control between them has undermined the focus and purpose of government operation. In his 1796 farewell address from office, George Washington warned against the harm political parties could cause to our system of government. He was very against political parties during his time in office, and he wanted to take a moment and add that into his farewell address just to reiterate that he did not believe they were in the best interest of the people and that it would be in the best interest of our government and our society going forward to use political parties instead of individual candidates. Nowadays, we see the problems that is caused by this two-party system in our legislation, the bartering, the bickering, the blocking that happens in Congress on a daily basis, the money race for president, which is what it is truly just a competition for who can raise the most, not put up the best candidate, and the Supreme Court becoming a political battleground divided by the party lines and fighting for spots that are going to last for the life of whoever sits in the seat. The cost of these fights at the highest level of government are felt every day by the citizens who that same government is supposed to serve and represent. It can be seen in every underserved community, in the struggles of the education system, and the failures of the justice system in this country today. The swift and effective passage of legislation has been crippled by the two-party system. In 2023, the Senate held 700 votes. That resulted in 27 bills being signed into law. Works out to about a 3.9% rate of votes actually resulting in a law being put into effect. That's how effective our government operates when two groups that are key points of our operation are controlled by two different parties. In that case, it was a Republican Senate and a Democratic president. Another very clear sign of just how ineffective the government becomes when it is divided like that is the increase in filibusters in the Senate. A filibuster is a senator's right to unlimited debate, meaning they can continue to talk as much as they feel necessary when it comes to a bill. And nowadays that is used as a blocking and a stalling method to prevent a bill from actually going to a vote. Between 2001 and 2010, 367 votes for cloture, the process required to end a filibuster, occurred. Between 2011 and 2020, 1,035 votes for cloture occurred. That shows just how drastically blocking attempts increased in the Senate. The rate of votes for cloture almost tripled in between decades there. The Pew Research Center did a survey in 2023, and 8 out of 10 US citizens responded negatively when asked about government. It's a very clear sign and an indicator that people feel how legislation is dragging behind the advancement and the changes in this country. The world, technology, society is moving ahead every day, but our legislation is too busy bickering to actually do anything about that. Another very clear issue is that the money that we spend on politicians getting into office as a nation increases every year, every election cycle. And it becomes a bigger factor than actually being qualified for office. It takes away the importance of that qualification, that experience, who the candidate is. And it becomes about just campaigning and putting someone into office. It also creates barriers for anybody smaller to get into office, but if you're not affiliated with one of the major parties. In the 2016 primaries for Republican presidential candidates, Donald Trump came out on top. One of the biggest things that was said about him, his biggest pro, was that he was a billionaire. He had all this money that he could self-fund his election. He wasn't going to require funding from different groups, from super PACs and these different organizations that expect favors when somebody takes office. And he was famous. He was a celebrity. So despite not having any real political experience, any time spent at any elected office, he managed to become the presidential candidate for the Republican Party out of a very large primary pool that year, the 2016 election, one of the largest they ever had. And it wasn't because he was the most experienced, most qualified candidate. That was not what they said about him. That was not his political agenda. That was not the narrative that was pushed. Come the 2020 election, over $14 billion was spent on the 2020 presidential election. That was double what was spent in the 2016 presidential election, increasing election over election. For the smaller parties, that's a barrier that they're never going to be able to overcome and be able to compete with the Democrats and Republicans. Billions of dollars just aren't going to happen for those smaller parties, and it keeps them out of that race. For the Democrats and Republicans, it's perfect. It keeps it as a two-horse race for more than just those elected offices. While the Supreme Court was supposed to be a neutral third branch of the federal government, it has become the center of one of the largest political battles between the Democrats and Republicans today. When Justice Scalia passed during the Obama administration, Obama had 8 months left on his term, and the Republican Senate refused to accept his nominee, citing that it was the will of the people to choose the next president, and that president would have the right to choose who would be put on that bench. Following the election, Donald Trump took office and put conservative Justice Gorsuch onto the seat, despite Democrats filibustering in an attempt to block his confirmation. That led to the Republican majority Senate changing the requirements for confirming a Supreme Court nominee from a supermajority, requiring 60 out of 100 votes, to a simple majority, 50 out of 100 votes. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passing in the final 4 months of Trump's first term led to a very expedited effort on behalf of the Republican Senate and himself to seat Justice Barrett onto it, despite denying Obama the right with 8 months left to nominate and even attempt to seat a Supreme Court justice. When the Republicans held the cards, they seated one who more aligned with their political agenda with 4 months left on their president's term. So a very clear, sign that it wasn't about giving the people the right to choose. It was about who had control at that moment. And this branch of government was intended to be the most independent. It is now a battle for control over these seats that are not an elected seat, but held for life, either death or retirement. Legislation in the US has become a shadow of what it was before, stagnant and blocked. The election process is more based on popularity and money than true qualifications and who would be the best to serve this country. And the Supreme Court has become a political hotbed. The battle for control between Republicans and Democrats has come at the expense of bettering our nation for the citizens they are supposed to serve and represent. Pete Carroll held games of tug of war at midnight to kind of capture this belief, and you have to be pulling on the same side to truly win together. I hope I kind of captured some of that same belief with this speech and showed what's happening now as we have these groups in control of our country pulling against each other. Thank you.